David had always preferred the quiet life. After years of serving as a soldier in distant battles, he had chosen to settle on a remote farm. His new life was peaceful, with the occasional visit from the colony's residents, but it was nothing like the chaos of the military. He enjoyed the freedom of working the land, the calm of the mornings, and the clear nights full of stars. On this particular evening, David was working late in his barn. The cool wind swept through the open door, and the stars above twinkled brightly. In the dark sky, as he moved a pile of hay, he heard a sound outside. It was faint at first, but then it grew louder, a knock on his door. He hesitated. No one ever came to visit this late. He wiped the sweat off his brow and made his way to the door, his boots clattering on the wooden floor. When he opened it, standing there was a woman he didn't recognize. She was tall, with an elegant air about her, and her skin was a deep shade of purple, unlike anything David had ever seen before. Her bright yellow eyes were focused, and there was a sorrow in them that was hard to miss. She stood there, looking at him, but didn't speak at first. It was clear she had something important to say, but David didn't know what it could be. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice low and cautious. The woman finally spoke, her voice soft but firm. "My name is Zara. I come from the planet." "Eltha," she began, her tone carrying a mixture of grief and determination. "I need your help." David was taken aback. He had never met anyone from Elthor, and the last thing he expected was a visitor from another planet, especially not in the middle of the night. The stars overhead suddenly seemed to hold a deeper meaning. "I'm not sure how I can help you," David said, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. "You're a long way from home. What brings you here?" Zara's eyes flickered with emotion. She hesitated, clearly struggling to find the right words. "I'm a widow," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "My husband was killed in the war. I have 2 children, and they need a father. I've come to ask for your help." David stood frozen for a moment. He wasn't sure he understood. The woman in front of him was asking for something unimaginable, something that didn't make sense. He was just a simple farmer. What could he possibly do for her? Zara seemed to read his confusion. "On my planet," she continued, "it is tradition. When a woman loses her husband, she must find a new partner to protect her family and carry on her husband's legacy. My children need a father, and I need someone strong to protect us." David felt his heart sink. The weight of her words hung in the air, and the silence between them grew thick. She wasn't just asking for a favor, she was asking for something far more profound. "I can't," David began, but Zara interrupted him, her voice steady, almost pleading. "I know this is strange. I know this is sudden," she said, her eyes meeting his. "But please, I have no one else to turn to. My children are young, and they need someone to guide them, someone to keep them safe. I know that you are capable, and I beg you, human, please help us." David looked at her, unsure of what to say. He wasn't a warrior anymore, wasn't even sure if he was ready for the responsibility of being a father to someone else's children. And yet something about Zara's plea moved him. He had seen war, and he knew how cruel and unforgiving the galaxy could be. If her husband had died in battle, she must have suffered greatly. He couldn't turn his back on someone in need. "Don't know what to say," he admitted, his voice thick with hesitation. Zara's expression softened. "You don't have to say anything. I don't expect love. I don't expect anything except for your protection. My children need a father, and I need a protector." David took a deep breath, still unsure, but something inside him told him he couldn't just close the door and walk away. He had seen too much of life's harshness to ignore someone's cry for help. "Come inside," David finally said, his voice steady now. "Let's talk more." Zara nodded, relief flooding her face as she stepped inside his modest home. The warmth of the fire in the hearth greeted her as she sat down in a chair near it. David poured her a drink, and they talked. Long into the night, Zara explained the customs of her people, the traditions she had grown up with, and the pain of losing her husband. Her children, she explained, were her world. Ari, her son, was 7, and Tess, her daughter, was only 5. They had been through so much already, and Zara was doing everything she could to keep them safe in a galaxy that often didn't care. For them, David listened, his mind racing. This was a lot to take in. He had known hardship, but nothing like what Zara was describing. Her people's traditions were strange to him, and yet he could feel her desperation. The night had grown cold, but he could see the fire in her eyes. It was a fire he hadn't seen in a long time, a fire that reminded him of the soldier he used to be. As they continued to talk, David began to realize that though he wasn't sure if he could truly be the father Zara sought, he couldn't turn her away. Not now. Not when she needed him the most. The future was uncertain, and David had no idea what would happen next. But for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose he hadn't known he'd lost. The days that followed Zara's arrival were filled with uneasy silence. David did his best to adjust to the new life that had unexpectedly fallen into his lap. His farm, once a place of peaceful solitude, now felt crowded. Zara and her children, and Tess, had moved into the small house he called home, and though they were grateful for his help, the atmosphere remained tense. Zara tried to stay busy, cooking and tending to the house, while Ari and Tess kept mostly to themselves. David, for the most part, stayed out of their way. He wasn't sure how to connect with the children. Ari was quiet, always looking at him with eyes full of uncertainty, while Tess was a little more open, but still cautious. David couldn't blame them. They had just lost their father, and now they were living with a stranger. He didn't know what to do, but he knew he had to try. One evening, after a long day working the fields, David came back to the house to find Zara sitting by the fireplace. She looked tired, her eyes distant, lost in thought. The soft crackle of the fire was the only sound in the room. Children were playing outside, enjoying the warm evening air. Zara, David said, sitting down across from her. How are they doing? She glanced up, a faint smile on her face, but it didn't reach her eyes. They're adjusting, she said quietly. Ari is still having trouble. He misses his father more than he shows. Tess, she's young. Doesn't quite understand what's happened, but she's strong. David nodded. They're lucky to have you. Zara's smile faltered, and she looked away. I don't know about that. I'm just doing my best. I only want them to be safe. David sat back in his chair, his fingers tapping the wooden armrest nervously. I don't know if I'm the right person to be doing this, he admitted, his voice heavy with uncertainty. I'm not a father. Not even sure I know how to protect anyone, let alone children. Zara's expression softened, and she stood up to sit beside him. You're already doing more than you know, she said gently. Just being here, offering us a place to stay, it's more than most would have done. You're already a protector in their eyes. David stared at the fire, his thoughts racing. He had been a soldier once, someone who fought to protect people. But that was a long time ago, and he hadn't felt like a protector in years. He had left that life behind, not wanting to be part of any more battles. But here, in this small house with Zara and her children, it was clear that the battle wasn't over. It was just different now. You're right, David finally said, breaking the silence. I can't ignore this. I can't turn my back on you or your children. Zara reached out and placed a hand on his arm, a gesture of gratitude. Thank you. You don't know how much this means to me, to all of us. David's heart tightened at the sincerity in her voice. He had never been good with emotions, but there was something about Zara's vulnerability that moved him. He had been living in isolation for so long that he had forgotten what it felt like to truly care for someone. But now, with Zara sitting beside him, he realized he had been living in a kind of emotional coldness. She had brought warmth back into his life. The next few days were a blur of work and quiet conversations. David spent his mornings in the fields while Zara kept the house in order. Ari and Tess slowly began to open up to him. Ari, who had been distant and reserved, started to follow David around the farm, asking questions about the plants and animals. Tess, ever curious, would sit by the fire, asking David to tell her stories about the stars and planets. Slowly they were starting to see him not just as a stranger, but as someone who could be trusted. One evening, as the sun began to set, David found Zara in the garden, tending to a small patch of flowers. She was bent over, her delicate hands working carefully. She looked up when she saw him approaching. "You're a good man, David," she said quietly, her voice full of admiration. David felt a rush of warmth spread through him, but he quickly pushed it aside. "I'm just doing what needs to be done," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Zara stood up and walked over to him. "You're doing more than that. You're giving us hope when we had none. And that is more valuable than anything." David couldn't meet her gaze. He didn't know how to respond. He had never thought of himself as anything special. But with Zara and her children, he was starting to feel like he might be. More than just a man trying to escape his past, days turned into weeks, and David began to see the changes in himself. He found himself looking forward to the evenings when Zara and the children would gather around the dinner table. They would laugh, share stories, and talk about their day. For the first time in years, David felt like he was part of something. Again, he wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was a father figure, a protector, and a friend. But the pressure of Zara's request weighed heavily on him. He had agreed to help her, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that he was stepping into, a role he wasn't prepared for. Every time he looked at Zara, he saw the hope in her eyes. But with that hope came an unspoken question. Would he be able to live up to the promise he had made? Zara didn't push him. She didn't ask for anything more than he was willing to give. But David knew that she had placed her trust in him, and that trust was something he couldn't take lightly. One evening, as they sat together on the porch, Zara turned to him, her face serious. "David," she said softly, "I know this is difficult for you, but I want you to know that I don't expect anything more than what you're already doing." David looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of his responsibilities.
"Die."
"No," he said quietly, "but sometimes it feels like too much." Zara smiled gently and took his hand. "It's never too much as long as we face it together." David squeezed her hand, realizing that she was right. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone. Days turned into weeks, and David slowly started to accept the changes in his life. It wasn't easy, and there were times when he felt overwhelmed by the responsibility that had been placed on his shoulders. But as time passed, he began to feel a sense of purpose again. The mornings had become a routine. David would rise early, tending to his fields and working the land as he always had. Zara, now fully settled into her new role on the farm, would help him with the daily chores. The children, Ari and Tess, spent their days either playing near the house or helping Zara with small tasks. David noticed that Ari had started to follow him more, asking questions about the farm and about human ways. Tess, on the other hand, had become quite attached to Zara, never straying too far from her mother's side, though the children were slowly opening up to him. David still couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty. He wasn't a father, and he wasn't sure if he ever could be. He did his best, of course, but he didn't know how to be what Zara needed. Still, the more he got to know her, the more he realized that he couldn't leave her alone to face her struggles. Zara had been through so much already, and he couldn't just walk away when she needed him the most. One morning, as David and Zara worked together in the garden, Zara looked over at him with a thoughtful expression. "You've been quiet lately," she said softly. "Something bothering you?" David paused in his work, wiping the sweat from his forehead. He had been thinking a lot lately, but he wasn't sure how to put his thoughts into words. "I'm just not sure I'm doing enough," he said finally. "I don't know how to be a father to your children. I'm not sure I'm the right person for this." Zara set down the tools she was holding and walked over to him. "You don't have to be their father," she said, her voice calm and gentle. "But you're already doing more than most. You've given us a safe place to stay, and you're helping Ari and Tess in ways that you might not even realize. It doesn't have to be perfect." David looked at her, feeling both grateful and conflicted. "But it feels like it should be," he replied. "I don't want to let you down." Zara smiled softly, her eyes filled with understanding. "Won't let me down," she said. "You already haven't. You've given us something we never had before, peace. For now, that's enough." David wasn't sure if it was enough, but he trusted Zara. She was strong, even in the face of so many challenges. She didn't need him to be perfect. She just needed him to be there, to help them when they needed it most. As the weeks passed, David began to notice small changes in himself. found himself caring more, not just for Zara and her children, but for the world around him. The farm felt more like home than it ever had before. The long hours of work didn't seem as lonely, and the evenings spent around the dinner table with Zara and the children brought him a sense of warmth he hadn't known in years. One afternoon, as David and Zara worked in the garden, Ari came, running up to them, his face full of excitement. "David, look!" he shouted, holding up a small wooden box. David smiled, wiping his hands on his pants. "What's that, Ari?" Ari handed him the box, his face glowing with pride. "I made it. I wanted to make something for Tess, so I made her a toy. I think she'll like it." David crouched down to look at the box. It was a simple wooden structure with small carvings on the sides, but it was clear that Ari had put a lot of effort into it. "It's great, Ari. Tess is going to love it," Ari beamed, his chest puffed out with pride. "I hope so." David stood up, ruffling Ari's hair. "You're doing a great job. Your father would be proud of you." Ari's face faltered for a moment, the weight of his father's memory still heavy on his young heart. But then he smiled again, a small but genuine smile. "Thanks, David." Zara, who had been watching from a distance, came over and placed a hand on Ari's shoulder. "You've done well, Ari," she said, her voice filled with warmth. David watched the exchange between mother and son, feeling a strange sense of fulfillment. He had never expected to be a part of something like this. But here he was, helping to shape the lives of two children who had lost so much. Later that evening, as they sat together at the dinner table, Zara spoke again. "David," she began, her tone serious but gentle. "I know this hasn't been easy for you, but I want you to know that I appreciate everything you've done for us. You've helped me more than I can ever repay." David looked at her, feeling a warmth spread through him. "I'm just doing what I can," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "It's the least I can do. You've given us a chance to heal, to start over." David nodded, his heart swelling with emotion. He didn't know what the future would hold, but he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't turn back now. Zara and her children had become a part of his life, and he wasn't about to walk away from them. No matter what happened, he would be there, just as he promised. The quiet, peaceful life he had once known now seemed distant, but David wasn't sure he wanted it back. What he had in all this family, this purpose felt more real than anything he had ever experienced. And for the first time in a long time, David felt that he had a place in the universe. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was living. The peaceful life that David had slowly grown used to was soon threatened. Zara had told him stories about the customs of her people, how their planet was a place where family and honor meant everything. She had once been a respected member of her society, but with her husband's death, things had changed. David had never fully understood the weight of her words until one evening, when the quiet of their small home was broken by a knock on the door. It was a sound that David had heard too many times before, in the military and in battle. It was the sound of something serious. Zara opened the door, and David stood behind her, noticing the tense expression on her face. A tall man stood in the doorway, his sharp features shadowed in the dim light. He was an Altherian, like Zara, but his stance and the way he carried himself made it clear that he wasn't here for a friendly visit. "Zara," the man said, his voice cold and commanding, "you've been avoiding me." David stepped forward, his instincts kicking in. "Who are you?" he asked, his tone firm but not aggressive. The man turned his gaze to David, sizing him up. "I am Balthor," he said, his eyes narrowing. "I have come to speak to Zara about her future." Zara stepped forward, her hand instinctively going to her side as if to protect her children. David watched her closely, sensing that there was more to this encounter than met the eye. "I don't want any trouble," Balthor, Zara said quietly, but there was a hint of defiance in her voice. "I've made my choice." Balthor's lip curled into a sneer. "You think you can refuse me? You are alone now, Zara. Your husband is dead, and you have no one to protect you or your family. I am your only option." David's jaw clenched, and he could feel his blood beginning to boil. He had seen this type of arrogance before, and it angered him. But Zara, despite her fear, stood her ground. "I don't need you," she said, her voice steady. I've made a life here, and I won't be controlled by you or anyone else. Balthor stepped closer, his towering figure casting a shadow over her. You may think that now, he said, his voice low and threatening. You are no longer in control. You will be mine, whether you like it or not. David didn't know what he was thinking in that moment. All he knew was that he couldn't let this man intimidate Zara. Without thinking, he stepped forward, his body tensing as he placed himself between Zara and Balthor. You'll have to go through me first, David said, his voice firm but calm. You're not taking her anywhere. Balthor looked at David with a mix of amusement and disdain. You human? He sneered. What are you going to do? David didn't have an answer, but he wasn't going to back down. Zara's eyes met his, and for a moment they shared a silent understanding. She was frightened, but she was also grateful. David had become someone she could count on, someone who would stand beside her in the face of danger. Balthor took a step back, his eyes lingering on David with a cold calculation. This is far from over, he said. Before turning and leaving without another word, David watched as the man disappeared into the night. Zara stood still, her face pale, but her expression was one of determination. That was Balthor. She said, her voice barely above a whisper. He's one of the most powerful men on Elthor. He thinks he can take whatever he wants. David could feel the weight of the moment. It was clear that Balthor wouldn't stop here, that he would keep coming after Zara and her family until he got what he wanted. David knew that protecting Zara was no longer just a matter of kindness. It was a matter of survival. We'll be ready for him, David said, his voice steady. I won't let him hurt you or your children. Zara gave him a small, grateful smile. I know, but I don't want to put you in danger. You have your own life here, and I don't want to drag you into this? David shook his head, stepping closer to her. You're not dragging me into anything, he said firmly. You and your kids are my responsibility now. I'll protect you. Over the next few days, things between them grew more serious. David didn't know exactly what he was supposed to do, but he was learning quickly. He spent hours researching Eltharian customs and laws, hoping to find a way to stop Balthor from taking what wasn't his. Zara, for her part, taught him everything. She knew about her people's traditions. It was clear that despite her fear, she wasn't going to back down without a fight. And neither was David. One evening, as they sat together by the fire, Zara looked at David with a thoughtful expression. I don't know how to thank you, she said quietly. You've already done so much for us. David looked at her, his heart swelling. You don't have to thank me, he replied. I'm not doing this for thanks. I'm doing this because I care about you and your children. Zara smiled, a mixture of gratitude and something else in her eyes. It is more than just thanks. It was the recognition of something deeper, something that had grown between them over the past few weeks. David wasn't sure where this path would lead. He wasn't sure if he was ready to be a father or a protector in the way Zara needed. But one thing was certain, he was committed to helping her fight. It's helping her and her children survive. Whatever came next, he would face it with Zara by his side. The tension in the air was thick. David could feel it in the pit of his stomach every time he stepped outside. He wasn't sure what to expect next, but he knew it wouldn't be good. Balthor wasn't the type of man who would just walk away. He would come back, stronger and more determined than before. And David had a sinking feeling that their lives were about to get even more complicated. Over the next few days, David worked harder than ever on the farm, trying to keep his mind focused on something else. Zara, too, kept herself busy with her usual chores, but David could see the worry in her eyes. Murray and Tess were quieter than usual, sensing the tension around them. The children had grown attached to David, and he couldn't bear the thought of them being hurt because of him. One afternoon, as David walked back from the fields, he saw Zara standing outside, looking out over the horizon. Thought, her hands clasped together as she gazed into the distance. David walked up to her slowly, not wanting to startle her. You okay? He asked softly. Zara turned to him, her face pale. I don't know, she replied quietly. I keep thinking about what Balthor said. It's about my future. About what will happen to us if he comes back. David frowned. Hadn't been able to stop thinking about that either. I won't let him hurt you, Zara, he said, his voice steady. We'll figure something out. I'll protect you and the kids. Zara gave him a weak smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. I know you will. But I'm not sure how long we can keep him away. He has too many people behind him, too much power. David looked at her, frustration building inside. Him. We can't just let him win. You've already lost so much. I won't let him take anything more. Zara reached out, placing a hand on his arm. I don't want you to put yourself in danger for me. You've done enough already. David shook his head. It's not enough. I'm not walking away from this. Not now. That night, David couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about what Zara had said, about how helpless they all seemed against Balthor's power. But then, an idea struck him. Maybe they didn't have to face Balthor alone. Maybe there was someone out there who could help them. The next day, David went to the local trading post, hoping to find information. The post was small, tucked away at the edge of the colony. But it was the only place where travelers and traders from different parts of the galaxy gathered. David had never been there much, but he knew it was a place where information could be found if you knew where to look, as he walked inside. The musty smell of old books and metal filled the air. The shopkeeper, a tall alien with dark blue skin, glanced up from behind the counter. Can I help you, human? The shopkeeper asked, in a deep, gravelly voice. David stepped forward, lowering his voice. I need information about Balthor, the Eltherian. The shopkeeper raised an eyebrow, but didn't seem surprised. Balthor? Eh? You're not the first to come asking about him. David's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? The shopkeeper leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Balthor is not just some powerful man. He's part of a larger network, a group of families that control nearly everything on Elthor. They're ruthless, and they don't like to lose. If you're looking to stop him, you'll need more than just strength. You'll need allies. David frowned. Allies? I don't know anyone who can help me. The shopkeeper looked around, making sure no one was listening. There's a group of rebels who oppose Balthor and his families. They've been fighting for years to take back control of Elthor. They might be able to help you. David's eyes widened. Where can I find them? The shopkeeper hesitated. They don't exactly advertise their location, but there's a contact, someone who knows where they are. You'll find him in the old bar near the edge of the city. He's not someone you want to mess with, but if you need information, he's the one to talk to. David nodded, feeling a spark of hope. Thank you. The shopkeeper gave a small, knowing smile. Don't thank me yet. Balthor won't go down without a fight. You'll need more than just a plan to take him on. That night, David didn't tell Zara what he was planning. He knew she would worry, and right now, he didn't want to add to her stress. But he couldn't sit back and do nothing. Balthor was a dangerous man, and if David didn't act soon, it would be too late. The next day, David made his way to the old bar, a run-down building that looked like it hadn't seen a customer in years. Inside, the air was thick with smoke, and the sound of murmuring voices filled the room. At the back of the bar, a tall alien with a scar running down the side of his face sat at a table, nursing a drink. He didn't look friendly, but David wasn't there to make friends. David approached him cautiously. Are you the one who knows where the rebels are? He asked, his voice steady. The alien looked up, sizing David up with a hard stare. If I am, he replied gruffly. David didn't hesitate. I need help. Balthor is coming after me and my family. I can't do this alone. The alien didn't respond right away. He took a long drink from his glass before speaking. I've heard of Balthor, he said slowly. And I've heard of you, human. You've got guts, but you'll need more than that to take him down. David leaned in, his voice low. I'll do whatever it takes. The alien studied him for a long moment before nodding. I'll take you to them. But you're in this for the long haul. If you're not ready to fight, walk away now. David didn't hesitate. I'm ready. The days following David's meeting with the rebel contact were filled with anticipation and tension. He hadn't told Zara about the rebels or his plans to seek their help. He knew that, as much as she trusted him, this was something she would not want him to do. Balthor was a threat to Zara and her children. David couldn't stand by while they were in danger. The alien with the scar, his name was Rook, had agreed to lead David to the rebel hideout. But Rook was a man of few words and David didn't know what to expect once they reached the rebels' base. He had heard rumors about them that they were ruthless, that they would do anything to fight against Balthor's control. But David needed them. If they could help him protect Zara, he would do whatever it took to earn their trust. David woke early the next morning, before the sun had even risen. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change. Zara was still asleep, her breathing steady, but he knew he couldn't wait any longer. He quietly gathered a few things and slipped out of the house, careful not to wake her. The walk to the old bar was long, and David's mind raced as he thought about what he was about to do. He had always been a fighter, but this was different. This wasn't a battle between armies. This was about protecting the people he cared about. This was about keeping Zara and her children safe, no matter the cost. When he reached the bar, Rook was already waiting outside, leaning against the building with his arms crossed. He gave David a curt nod but said nothing. Without a word, Rook turned and started walking. David followed closely behind, trying to keep his nerves in check. They walked for what felt like hours, moving through the outskirts of the colony, passing dark alleyways and crumbling buildings. The farther they went, the more David felt like he was entering unknown territory. Rook finally stopped in front of an old warehouse. It was large and industrial, its metal doors rusted and covered with graffiti. "This is it," Rook said, his voice low and serious. He pushed open one of the doors with a creak, revealing a dark hallway inside. David followed him without hesitation. Though his heart was pounding in his chest, the inside of the warehouse was dimly lit. But as they moved further in, David saw a group of people gathered around a table. They were a mix of different species, all armed and alert. Some of them looked up as David entered, their eyes narrowing with suspicion. But Rook spoke to them in a language David didn't understand, and the tension in the room eased. Rook turned. To David, "These are the rebels. They're the only ones who can help you." One of the rebels, a tall woman with sharp features and green skin, stepped forward. Her name was Mira, and her eyes studied David with interest. "So you're the human who wants to take on Balthor?" she asked, her tone a mix of skepticism and curiosity. David nodded, trying to look confident, though his nerves were getting the better of him. "I need your help. Zara and her children are in danger. Balthor wants to take everything from them. I can't do this alone." Mira looked him over for a moment, sizing him up. "Balthor is no small threat," she said finally. "We've been fighting him and his families for years, but we don't take anyone into our fold unless they prove they're worth it." David didn't hesitate. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I'm not backing down." Mira gave a small nod. "We'll see." She turned and gestured for him to follow her. She led him to a small room at the back of the warehouse, where a group of rebels was gathered around a table covered in maps and plans. "This is where the real fight happens," Mira said as she approached the table. "We have a plan to take down Balthor, but we can't do it without help. We've tried before, and every time we fail, it's because we don't have enough people on our side." David felt his heart race. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. "What do you need me to do?" Mira glanced at the others around the table before speaking. "We need someone to infiltrate Balthor's camp, someone who can get close enough to gather information about his next move. We need to know where he's going to strike next so we can hit him first." David didn't even think before responding. "I'll do it. I'll go." Mira raised an eyebrow. "You're sure?" Or David nodded firmly. "I'm sure." Rook stepped forward then, his face serious. "It won't be easy. Balthor's camp is heavily guarded. You'll be putting your life on the line." "I understand," David replied, determination in his voice. "I'm ready." The rebels spent the next few hours going over the plan with David. They gave him a small communicator to stay in contact with them and explained the best way to sneak past the guards and gather the information they needed by the time they finished. David's mind was spinning with all the details. It was risky, dangerous, and could end badly. But it was their only chance to stop Balthor before it was too late As David prepared to leave, Mira gave him a serious look. "This isn't just about saving Zara," she said. "This is about ending Balthor's reign for good. If we can bring him down, we can free Elthor from his grip." David nodded, knowing that what he was about to do wasn't just about Zara's family anymore. It was about something much bigger. He was about to fight for freedom, for justice, for the future of those he had come to care about. With one last look at the rebels, David stepped out of the warehouse and into the night. He didn't know what lay ahead, but he was ready to face it, no matter the cost.